You are listening to a pleasure podcast. For more from our Sex Podcast Collective, visit pleasurepodcasts.com.
Welcome back to Private Parts Unknown, a podcast about love and sexuality around the world. I'm Courtney Kosak, and privates, today we are, going to Cumtown, specifically Barbie Cumtown, the land of the female orgasm. I have been wanting to do an episode about female orgasm for a while, and then I realized, I already have the perfect interview in the archive. It's from the last season of Reality Bites. So you are going to hear former co-host Sofiya, Alexandra, and Dave Rankin on the mics with me. Honestly, when I was editing, it was such a sweet blast from the past to hear us all together. So I hope you enjoyed that. And our guest is none other than Emma Koenig, author of Moan, Anonymous Essays on Female Orgasm. Emma shares how her popular Tumblr, How to Make Me Come, evolved into a powerful book that explores the diverse and often misunderstood experiences of female pleasure.
Moan started as a blog first.
Correct.
And same with your first book?
Yes. So the first book was Fuck, I'm in my 20s.
Yeah, that's perfect. So kind of how did you start the blog trajectory that led to these books?
Well, so with Fuck, I'm in my 20s, it was truly an accident that anything became of it. I mean, I basically wanted to make a zine. Mm-hmm. And I kept putting that off, but developing ideas for it. And then my family was kind of just put it online. What are you doing? And so I made this Tumblr, which Tumblr was very popular at the time. And then very quickly, it picked up steam and people were looking at it and it led to it being a book. And then because I had done that path before unintentionally, I knew how to do that. So I thought that would be a good way to start the Moan project, which I always knew I wanted to be a book, but I thought, it's good to have a test ground, see how people are reacting, and if people are even interested before you spend all this time and energy trying to make it into something more.
Mm-hmm. What did it look like when you first started that blog? And what was the early response?
For Fuck in My 20s or Moan?
Oh, for Moan, yeah.
Basically, it all started from just a bad sexual experience I had, and I was kind of how can this be that there's such miscommunication between sexual partners and specifically about the female orgasm? And it feels like we are just miseducated as a society about what that even is, how to get there, what is good sex. I feel like we've had such a great conversation about consent in the past few years, which was not the case when I was in high school or college. But at the same time, I'm consent's great, but consent is the bare minimum.
Right.
You also want to have great sex, not just I said it was okay that we were doing this. So I think because this experience really stayed with me and I couldn't stop thinking about it, I was I gotta explore this phenomenon of misunderstood female sexuality. And I really want to get to the truth about female desire, and not just desire, but frustration too.
Because that guy thought he got you off.
Yeah.
This one guy, he really catapulted this.
I know. I thank him in some ways. But I think that is just such a typical experience that when it happened, I wasn't how dare you? I was kind of yeah, it is tough. It is tough to know because the way we learn about female orgasm or just sexuality in general is from pop culture and pornography and religion and just all these things which give you a really distorted view on sex, whether you're male or female or neither. And so I reached out to about 200 women and I wrote about this experience I'd had. And I was
wait, 200 women. How did you get?
Just some close personal friends.
Courtney's how do you meet that many people? I would love to know more. She's is anyone outside of this room available for friendships?
Well, I definitely I emailed a lot of people that are not necessarily close friends. I was just women who I have met in my life, do you want to talk about this? and people responded in this really intense way. And I
That's
wrote,
how you know.
yeah, because it was like I wrote like a insane email that was like really long, and I said at the top like, this is a really long email, wait till you're like in an Uber or like you're in line for something, like you don't want to accidentally start reading this. And you know, people never respond to my emails in general. I just feel like email is like a terrible form of communication. So the fact that people actually read it, actually were like, I want to participate, I was like, oh, this is big, this is exciting. So then I started collecting all these essays from people and asked them to forward it to other people. So I didn't necessarily have to know the person personally. And I would work with people to an extent. I didn't really want to like over edit what people were saying, but sometimes I'd read an essay and be like, oh, I love this part. Like, what were you feeling in that moment? Or like, what made you think of that? Or, you know, I tried to just like push people a little, but mostly kind of was hands off. And then I wanted to drop them all at once, Beyonce style. So I was like, August 17th, 2015 is the big date. Because
is there a music video for each essay?
I wish. I mean, that's my next trick.
That sounds so good. Please do that.
Because I was like, there's something, like the way that I did Fuck in My 20s, which totally different because it was like drawings, but I tried to be really diligent about that, even with no end goal. I was just like, I'm going to post one like every day at midnight, because I thought that's when people would be online looking at Tumblr.
Oh.
And so
She's wily.
I'm very wily. So I think with this, I was like, I feel like this won't hit people the same way if it's like an essay a day or an essay a week. I think you have to feel like this huge weight of this encyclopedic knowledge all at once of like, oh my God, like all of them next to each other. I felt like it would leave more of an impact. And I think I was right, because then people were really looking at it.
I wasn't familiar with the project until I came across the book. Did you keep adding more essays, or like what was the trajectory of that?
Well, so first off, I'll just say that the blog was called How to Make Me Come. And I changed it for the book just to be a little more accessible to the average everyday American. But
I really like the directness of How to Make Me Come.
Yeah, because like basically the prompt that I asked women to write from was, if you could write an essay entitled How to Make Me Come, give it to a past, present, future sexual partner, what would you want them to know?
I love that.
Free of judgment or repercussion.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and then I was like, you know, if you don't literally want to answer that, just like whatever your feelings are, whatever you want to say about female orgasm. But to answer your question about like, after I posted the Beyonce day, I did start, like I made an email account. I started like getting random people
like submitting,
but I found it to be a more challenging experience to navigate that than when I was like spending 3 months leading up to the drop date, because even though there were a bunch of people I didn't know in that bunch, it was different to have people already see what the project was and then send them to me. I felt like in some ways sometimes people were like misunderstanding it. For example, you know, there was a woman who like wrote something. She was like very upset about a date she had gone on with this guy. And like, I was trying to offer the same kind of like gentle guidance I had in the first iteration of just like, okay, so I feel like this is kind of like generalizing about men. And I don't think that's what you actually mean, or is it? And she was like, well, isn't that the point of this, to kind of, that it's like, to kind of shame men? And I was like, oh, absolutely not. That's not my intention. So I just found it like, I don't want to get into those conversations with people I don't know about like who perceive the project to be something else. And it was just me. And I was getting too many emails and I was like, I gotta like take a break. So I posted like some of those, but then I was like, I have to take a step back.
I love, it's in your intro of Moan, but you say, when we misunderstand or ignore female orgasm, we are misunderstanding and ignoring women, which, I mean, you're not trying to shame men. It's like an education.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think it's like hopefully therapeutic for the people who are writing it and reading it.
Can you name like, I don't know, one or a couple things that you were surprised to learn about female orgasm?
Well, I think, you know, some people have told me that when they've read the book, male and female, they've gotten like defensive reading things, been like, that's like not what happens or whatever. And it's just like reminds us all that like sexuality is so idiosyncratic and like everybody's turned on and turned off by different things. And I think it's potentially even more complicated for women on like an anatomical level and also just like on a psychological level because of the culture we were raised in. But I think I felt that way too, not defensive per se, but just I would read things and be like, really? Is that like real? Because that's not what it's like for me.
What's like an example?
Yeah, what do you
So
mean?
so like one of them was talking about how she comes so easily even just from like friction in her jeans.
That's
This
me.
Yeah,
bitch,
that's
this
great.
bitch.
And I like, you know, knew on some level that wasn't like a shocking thing to me. I was like, yeah, I kind of have heard whispers of that, but it's so disconnected from my experience that I was like, maybe surprised is the wrong word, but just like, oh, it's exciting to see something like a really comprehensive take on something I've never experienced. It feels foreign to me.
So you're like, it is real.
Yeah.
They're out there.
is real.
They're out
Right. And I think that like it was like a re-education for me about sexuality because like as I keep saying, I'm like, I'm not a sexual expert at all. I'm just like someone who's interested in sex. I'm just a fan. But I'm not like an expert on it. So I think like
You're like an enthusiast.
totally a collector. But yeah, I just feel like reading all those essays re-educated me because it was just like, right. Everybody's different. I love the ones that contradict each other. Like there are people who are like, don't you dare like push me down, make it violent, call me a bitch. And other people are like, slap me around, call me a bitch. I'll come right away. And it's like great to just see that it's such a spectrum.
In your intro, you talk about like being 12 and like having your first like over the bra action. It just made me go, because like when I was that age, I remember being in 5th grade and I had a teacher who went to my same church, and I was like a kid who liked to like masturbate when I was by myself or whatever. And there was like a ridge on this desk chair that was like, oh my God. You guys.
You were like, is that Cherridge single? What's it doing for prom?
Seriously. So I was like in class as a 5th grader, like rubbing my fucking vagina on the thing during math. And like, I remember her, she was like probably not trying to bring it to the attention of my classmates, but I remember her being like shaming me essentially, which fair enough, I shouldn't have been doing it at that moment. But also like I went to church, I just like got it in my head kind of in that moment that I was like, oh, this is bad. Like I shouldn't do this for a long, and then I didn't do it as much for a really long time.
Cognizant in that moment that it was a sexual thing, or were you just kind of like, whoa?
I was like, this feels fucking great.
How long did you go?
This is like that story that you've heard me tell about getting busted when I was a kid, like using other kids to help me masturbate in kindergarten when I was 5. Oh, have you not heard me tell the story? Yeah. And my teacher called my mom in, and my mom was super pissed because she's a single mom and she's like always working, and it's like she had to come down to kindergarten because they were like, your daughter's using other children in the class to help her jerk off. And my mom was so mad when she got there. And then my teacher like came out and she brought out a needle and thread and she said, if you ever do something like this again, I'm gonna sew your mouth shut.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I was 5, you guys. I was like, oh. And then I just was like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna keep my masturbating to myself.
Well, you're not gonna sew the other part up, right?
Yeah,
Hey,
well, that's
then
literally a
I'm not
line
gonna
in my
stop.
story. I'm like, well, those aren't the lips that are causing the problem, right? But it didn't stop me. It just stopped me from involving other people in my jerking off. I was like, well, now I have to keep this on the DL, and it is
Like
so
a normal
fucked up and
person, you guys.
shameful.
No, it's shameful.
I felt like the reason I started telling this as a story is because I felt so ashamed of it for like so long in my life.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh my God, only a real deranged sex maniac would do this at like 5, you know?
Totally.
And it was one of those things you think about secretly your whole life. You're like, if anybody found this out about me, I would die. And it's like you telling me that right now made me feel better about my thing too. And me telling my story made me feel better. Every time I did it, it was like, oh, this is so much less shameful.
But it followed me into like my sex life eventually with guys. Like I wouldn't want to masturbate around guys, and was really like, then didn't really like explore that even more until my late 20s. It's just crazy. It's like, did you find shame coming up a lot in these?
There's definitely a lot of shame in the essays. I feel like I've been really lucky in that I was raised Jewish, but not like super religious. My parents were always like, I was about to say like encouraging me to have sex. That's not what I mean. but I think like never made me feel bad about sex, never told me it was bad. I got sex ed in high school, which was like fine. So I feel like all the forces were like typically it could, make you feel really bad. I didn't have. And yet I'm still just like a girl who grew up in America. So I still have, my own shame about different things that like I think is impossible to just like circumnavigate. There's always going to be it coming from some direction. Even if you have like, oh, no one told me it was bad ever. Mm-hmm. You still just get these little whispers from the world that it is.
Totally.
So like starting with the guy feeling you up over your bra, then like kind of what were your other firsts if you feel comfortable?
Well, I feel like the big first of like losing my virginity, I really wanted to make sure it was really special because not because anyone told me to, but just because I was like, I think if you have a really positive experience with that, then leading forward, like your sex life will be better. Like I just had some sense of like, I don't want to psychologically damage myself by having sex with the wrong person.
So the opposite of what I was thinking. I love it.
Which I think is like different for every person. Like I think at a certain point, I went to a high school where like it felt like at a certain point I was the only virgin, which I know wasn't true, but just like I feel like everyone was having sex so young. So like I remember being 15 and looking around being like, oh my God, I'm the only virgin. And like being like, should I just have sex with like a buddy and just like call it a day just to like get over that? And my mom said something to me which really struck me where she was like, anybody can have sex. Like it's not special. It doesn't make you like smarter or like more mature or more interesting. It's like the easiest thing to do. So like if you're thinking about it as like a status thing, just throw that away because anyone can have sex.
What a cool speech.
I know.
I'm gonna
memorize that. Smart lady.
She's great. Well, she's a therapist, which helps.
That can go either way, though.
True. So then I feel like I really had in my head like I want to wait till I'm in love, and then so I did that. I waited until I was love, and I met this guy at a summer program, and I think he maybe wasn't a virgin, but I lost my virginity to him, and it was like great. It was like really discussed beforehand. I think I even told my parents beforehand, like this is what's gonna happen. Like he's the one. And so it felt like this kind of nice preserved experience. Do I think like if you don't have that, like your sex life is damaged forever? No. But I think like that's just something I really wanted for me that I knew like it would be important to me. So
I hope if people are listening to this who are virgins, that's like a really cool takeaway because I think, you're right. It's not that it's going to fuck you up forever if you don't do this, but like clearly it's so much more gratifying for you if you do.
Yeah, if you want. I mean, I think after that I was like, great, had that experience. Like now I'm not going to hold every experience to the same standard.
Orgasm
as that.
First time?
No.
Probably not, right?
No.
Probably hurt so fucking much.
I feel like I probably said that I had one because I didn't get what it was. But yeah, I mean, I think, well, it's funny because like I remember at that time in my life of like being in high school and even younger, the conversations between like me and my girlfriends were so much more open about sex in a strange way than they are now because we were all doing things for the first time. So we would be like, wait, what does it feel like when somebody fingers you? Like, what do you do? Like, we're just asking all these nitty gritty questions, which now would just be like perceived as kind of bizarre. Like, what did it feel like when that guy fingered you last weekend?
Totally.
But I think
people would be like, Sofiya, you're a little too invested in my sex life.
But I feel like when you do get to have those conversations with close friends, that's where you discover you're like, oh my God, me too. Like I feel that way about whatever sexual thing. And it's really nice.
Yeah, I like it when Courtney bonds with me by telling me about her butt eating. It's great.
Do you like butt eating?
I mean, she likes to have her butt eaten.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, I don't like to eat, but I mean, whatever, each to their own.
I feel like in 2018, it's the thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
My friend Peggy Sinat, who's super funny, has this joke about how she's like, that song, My Neck, My Back, My Pussy, and My Crack was so ahead of its time. She's like, I remember in the 90s we were listening to being like, and my crack? Oh my
And
gosh.
now people are like,
and she's
am I
like,
cracked?
now,
Obviously.
and she's like, and now it's like, well, if you're a gentleman. And I love that
bit.
joke.
That's great.
Guys, check out Peggy Sinat.
Yeah, I heard her do that bit at your last show. So, what are some tips for women trying to communicate to their partners how to make them come?
Totally. Well,
That's the question.
it is the question. Well, I think step one is you really have to like do some soul searching by yourself. Because I think that even with asking people to write this essay, a lot of people were like, wow, this is one of the hardest things for me to write. And I think it's because we often don't give ourselves the space to really contemplate our own sexuality. I think there's a lot of pressure to be a sexual expert. Basically, once you lose your virginity, you've had sex, it's like I've been having sex for like 15 years or whatever. It seems like, oh, I should know everything about it and everything about myself. Sure. But it's just like, no, of course you don't. Because it's like a new person every time. You grow older, your tastes change, your body changes, like your mind changes. So it's like you have to keep up with yourself as you're evolving. And so I think it's like, yeah, maybe when I was like 15, I had one idea about what sex meant. And I don't know if it's exactly the same thing now. So it's like, I'd say one, take an afternoon, take an evening, just do some quiet thinking. And then I think there's a couple ways to like go about actually communicating. Communication is the hardest thing ever.
Especially like we live in this culture and hopefully it's getting better, but like, where men can be easily emasculated and, sex is especially touchy in that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think like now what's cool about right now is I think people are being forced to have uncomfortable conversations about sex. What sucks is it's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But I think it's like better to do that than to be like, oh, I don't really know what's allowed and like what's cool. It's like, yeah, might as well just like have a weird conversation for like 5 minutes about like, this is what, I want you to do to me, or this is what I don't want, than to just be in the moment.
I think as a guy, like I would appreciate that conversation, which I've had that conversation a few times, but like more than just assuming that, oh, she's not really coming and she's not trying, or we're not trying to work to get that to happen.
Totally.
Almost like it's like, get it over with. Like, I don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, as this book shows, it's like, it's so different for every woman. Mm-hmm. And also I hope that the invisible thread too is like, it's different for men too. It's like, I think people have joked about like, if this were a book written by men, it would be like 1 page. Yeah.
That's funny.
But I think, cause it's like, yeah, in general, it's probably easier for a guy to come. Like, I think there's no argument there, but at the same time, like to pretend like it feels exactly the same for each person and like people are turned on by the same stuff is like misleading and wrong. So a lot of times people talk about how like talking about sex can be like so dry and awkward and it like takes away like the magic, which like I totally understand that.
If it's during sex, sometimes.
Yeah.
That's why the talk, I'm like, when, like how to do it, sure, that's a tip.
Right.
But, like,
you wouldn't want me to be like, what would be hot if you ate my ass?
I think that's great.
I don't like getting, that. I don't like order taking. That feels weird.
Oh.
So how would you like a woman to approach you, Dave?
If it was like,
if I sent him a text.
Yeah, just text me. That's how I communicate best.
Well, that's great.
No, seriously.
No, I mean, I was
supporting the text.
I mean, honestly, yeah, if it was a separate conversation, but I feel like and a little bit of direction, sure, but like, it's like, stop the presses. I don't know.
Yeah.
That feels.
So wait, like, would you rather somebody like, okay, let's say like I had sex with you last night. Mm-hmm. Would you rather today I text you and I'm like, hey, great time last night.
Just a few notes.
Just some points.
No, like after
sex. Because
that
sounds awful.
No.
So I don't know how you would.
I was kidding about that. I mean, like after sex, maybe you're like laying down, like maybe that would be an opportunity. Like,
but don't you feel like in the afterglow, you're like, that was pretty great, and then the person's like, Sal, let me run it real quick.
Would it? No, not necessarily.
Is that not?
I wouldn't be like, yeah, I wouldn't feel shitty about that.
I guess to me, it's like I feel like I'm more like in the moment because I feel like it's less harsh. But also, I'm not prescriptive. I'm more like,
it's delivery.
Fuck me harder, or like,
yeah.
Wait, bite me so I don't come right now, or things like that. Versus like, it'd be great if you actually did this, or I don't know.
It's tough.
Yeah.
I mean,
it sounds like you're doing it okay.
Feedback.
Like some people do it badly.
So
people give
that's what I
updates
want to
badly.
get to. Like give what you think is badly. Trying to get our listeners some tips, some hot tips.
I mean, what not to do? I mean, like I find like my experience is that it's very rare to find a woman like that comes very easily. And I've slept with tens of women. But that's rare. More often than not, it's a more difficult process I found for women to come. And there are these, partners I've had where it felt like they already made it this foregone conclusion that they weren't going to come.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was kind of like
procedural.
And it felt really procedural. Like it was like,
it sucks that they've given up because then you're like, we're having sex, but you're already not planning on like putting all of yourself into it.
Like you're doing stuff because you think this is going to like end it.
How often are you?
And that's happened a few.
Are you
times.
actively trying to get these? And I know this sounds like a stupid question, but not all guys are concerned with their partners.
Guys,
orgasm.
I mean, if you're growing up like watching porn and stuff, all the guys can, hold it and they don't come for like an hour, and which is like unrealistic. And all the women come the minute that, a dick's inside them. And that's also unrealistic. So we're all kind of like fucked up from that. But I think like a guy wants to make a woman come. Yeah. And he wants to like last long enough, hoping that by doing so, we'll get there eventually. But
you're saying you're always trying.
Always trying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. I think some people truly like are not. Like I truly are not even thinking about it, or are thinking like all I have to do is like fuck this girl and then she'll come, which I feel like is just rarely the case.
Rarely.
Hey, privates, we are dedicating this entire episode to the female orgasm because of how important it is. Millions, probably even billions of women all share the same desire: greater pleasure and passion in their relationships. Are you curious about transforming those intimate moments from just fine to absolutely fantastic? Whether it's your solo journey or an adventure shared, it's about time you discovered the full spectrum of your desires. Welcome to the Intimate Revolution, brought to you by Vasoplex, our incredible sponsor. Listen, this isn't just any product. It's a key to unlocking an ocean of arousal and pleasure, specially crafted for the feminine spirit. Men have their little blue pills. Now women have Vasoplex. So Vasoplex is an all-natural feminine moisturizer that increases sensitivity, sensation, and satisfaction. It's your secret weapon for better sex. And tons of women have discovered that Vasoplex is more than a game changer, it's a life changer. Each application ushers in a concert of sensations, turning every touch, every whisper into an exquisite dance of delight. With Vasoplex, envision an encounter that transcends the ordinary. It's not merely about using a product, it's about inviting an experience. A silky, subtle, and utterly luxurious experience that your very sexiest days and nights are made of. Unlock this magical journey for yourself with our exclusive offer of 20% off for Private Parts Unknown listeners. Just use code PRIVATE at vasoplex.com. Embrace the luxury of Vasoplex, where your deepest pleasures await. Visit vasoplex.com and transform your intimate experiences with code PRIVATE for 20% off. Let Vasoplex guide you into a realm of infinite delight. Don't forget to check the episode's description for all the exciting details.
But yeah, I think in terms of like, there's no right answer of like, this is the moment to have the conversation, because obviously that's going to like vary person to person. I do think like, I happened to like have this whole experience like basically a couple days before I put the blog up. I met my now boyfriend, and we've been together this like whole process.
That's sweet.
Which I don't think is like a coincidence. I think after like I was like deep in this like emotional like world of women and sexuality that I was like, oh, now I'm like ready to meet someone. But I think if I were like out in the world again, single, my MO would kind of be like, okay, see what the first time is like, maybe without having a conversation,
Totally.
unless it organically comes up. And then you can kind of, because, sometimes you do just like have amazing sex with someone right away.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of like, great, no notes. But other times, like maybe you realize like, okay, I'm never going to see the person again. So that I think is interesting because that's where I feel like people can have bad habits that are never corrected.
Definitely.
No one's going to take the time if it's just a one-time thing
So
to
if
be like, by the way, you fuck bad.
If like there's once again, I say this with like total empathy, not trying to be like, fuck guys like this, but truly like, okay, say you're a guy, you have sex with a girl, you're maybe like not totally aware of her experience for whatever reason. She doesn't have a good time. She doesn't feel like you gave her any pleasure. And then she's like, okay, never going to do that again because that guy's obviously like not in tune with me. Then he goes on to the next girl. It's the same thing. And it's like, yeah, if no one ever sits you down and is like, hey, it might help if you did, for me at least.
Yeah.
That's the thing for me, right?
Yeah. And I've done that with people, even the guy in this book. Once he thought I came and I didn't, I was like, oh, I totally didn't, but here's what might help next time. Just like some tips for me.
The next time
it didn't work. So I was like, because he didn't do any of the stuff. So I just felt like you either weren't listening or what you have like some weird blind spot where you're like not able to like take what we talked about and like apply it. But I think like it's good that I at least said something because who knows, like maybe he would go to the next person, maybe try one of my helpful tips.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't work for that person, but it leads to a conversation.
I think in a certain way, it's like every woman is like cracking a safe, you know? And like every woman's combo is different, but like sometimes it could be similar.
No.
So I feel like every time you're like relearning, and that must be sometimes hard for some men. Like not everybody learns the exact same way when it comes to anything. So I feel like, yeah, like experientially to be able to be empathetic enough to what your partner is going through enough to then be able to take what they tell you they're experiencing and translate it to what you would do. I feel like sometimes that's probably an advanced skill that, you know, doesn't come naturally to everybody.
Totally. And we're all programmed to like, you know, not care about that. I feel like just like our sexual education isn't, we don't in sex ed get a talk that's like, okay, so maybe like during it, like look the other person in the eyes, kind of like gauge their emotional state. Like we're not really talking about that. We're like, here's how you put a condom on. And I think if there are any like themes that run throughout this book, I think one is that the emotional experience of women has kind of been disregarded as part of the sexual experience. And I would argue the same for men. Like I feel like there's this weird sense that like maybe has some roots in biology, but like has maybe been like warped for people's own needs, is like that men are just like sex crazed and don't care about anything, and women are so emotional and uptight. And like, I really don't believe that. Like,
and also that women want sex less than men do.
Yeah,
which is
I feel
nuts.
like I have so many friends where they're like, ugh, like the guy just like doesn't want to have sex with me as much. And I feel like I'm like, yeah, what's this myth that like guys are just like hard all the time? Maybe when we were like 16.
100%. Yeah.
But like not now, certainly. So
I've definitely had partners. That is definitely a popular belief that like the female libido isn't as strong. And I've definitely had most of my partners, I would say, have a lower sex drive.
Every single guy I've dated, I've wanted to have sex more often than them.
Isn't the libido thing like a scientific thing? Isn't it that men hormonally peak at like 16 or 18 and women much later? Is that a fact?
Well, that's like part of it, but
yeah, I mean, I think it is a hormonal thing. I actually just heard this thing the other day. I would have to do like more research about it, but someone was telling me that when they study the brain observing like pornography and stuff, it's like women are turned on by such a wider spectrum of things than men. Like straight women are turned on by like men, women, like
totally
gay porn, whatever. And someone said like it's because like of our ancestors needed to be like turned on by more things so that they would get wet, so that they would not be in pain.
Whoa.
Oh. Yeah.
I don't know. That's a lot to
my God,
That's sad science.
Heartwarming.
So it felt less like rape. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Wow. The sad science update.
But you know, just something to think about.
No, I've definitely heard that, yeah, women will, when they study them, watching any sort of remotely erotic material, no matter who's the subject, they'll totally get wet.
Yeah.
But also it's like possible to just want to know enough that you learn from experientially. I feel like the main lesson is to just pay attention to your partner, whether you're like male or female, or it has nothing to do with anything other than the more in tune you are with the body of the person you're doing stuff with, the better you'll be at it.
Yeah.
I had an ex who literally was so good at making me come, and I was always like, oh my God, how are you doing this? And he was like, oh, there's like a vein that like throbs right here on the inside of your thigh, and like I can feel when it throbs faster or whatever, you're gonna come or whatever. He was just so matter of fact about just knowing physically where shit was located. I was like,
oh man, I could just hear like men are probably listening, and like it's like when you say like crack a safe or something, it's like men are probably like, all right, so what is the one move I can do that is foolproof, that if I just master that one move, that's how we think. We think that there's one move. Like I thought for years I had this one kind of position and move, like I was pretty successful at it, and then I just wasn't anymore. I was like, well, we had a good run, little move.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that not everybody would be up for this, but like I would recommend this if you're feeling wild and crazy to like literally write an essay like this for the person you're having sex with. Because
I love that challenge.
There is something just like erotic about reading your partner being like, this is what I want you to do to me. That kind of takes away like the awkwardness of like, okay, so maybe I've never said out loud like, okay, this is what I want to happen to my clit or whatever.
So I've made this PowerPoint presentation.
Right. Because I think it's like, you know, sometimes I watch porn where like people have like really great phrases and I'm kind of like, should I file that away for like when I'm having sex? Like people are just like, say great things that seem to like really indicate what they want. For me, I'm a writer. So it's like, I think I'm like better at just like writing it down. And I think like for most people, like even if like you're not writing full time, it's like you have a chance to like slow down and be like, okay, what do I actually like? Where does the sexual experience start for me?
And you can write so many of these for like every scenario. This is very sexy.
I mean, I think also the people who wrote in this book, and like I wrote an essay in this book anonymously.
I was going to try to get you to tell.
Oh, never.
Can we email you with our guesses for what makes you come?
Maybe. But I just feel like most of us wrote this like in 2015 and now would write like totally different essays. Ooh. And so it's like, this is like an ongoing thing. I think it'd be super fun, like when you start dating somebody to just, and who knows, maybe that's not like literally an essay. Maybe it is like a text conversation.
They actually say that your partner is more receptive. We were joking about it being via text, but there's been research where people are more open to hearing about their partner's weirder turn-ons or whatever. If it's via text or via like some sort of written where it's not like you're looking the person in the eye and you know what I mean? Like you have a second by yourself to process what the thing is.
Ooh, I like that a lot. Because I think part of it, like when someone's telling you really personal stuff, you start to become sometimes in your head about how you're reacting. You're like, am I like giving them a face that like shows I'm being supportive? And am I like nodding like I'm listening? And am I like not making them feel judged?
So funny.
And I think it's like, you know, we all do that to some degree. So I think like to just eliminate your own response, having to have an immediate response and even like to have to say like, oh, I like that too or not. Maybe you need a second to be like, would I like that? Never done that before. Okay, I'll give it a try. Or like, no, I think it would bother me. So it's just like, does give you some space to do that. I like that.
I feel like we should end on that assignment for our listeners.
That's such a great assignment. I love it.
Yeah.
I'll do it.
You all should do it.
We are all doing
Dave's
it.
going to have to write like 10 letters.
It's the orgasm letter challenge.
And it definitely changes because I think about young Dave, totally different than now. Now it's like,
I know it's almost a time capsule in a way. I love that you suggest doing that because like even to go back and discover about yourself. But like if you are with that person and it does evolve too, it's just, that's a cool thing.
You said
to
you
think
wrote
about.
the essay and then you were like, I'm ready. And then you met someone.
Yeah.
It was almost like you put it out there.
Right.
A little bit.
That's so funny.
Manifested, if you
right,
will.
I manifested. Yes.
You're welcome.
That's great. I'm stealing that.
Yep, you're
When
welcome.
this podcast first started, it was because I was like wondering what I wanted and like going through that whole thing. And then the podcast started in earnest. And like 6 weeks later, I had a boyfriend.
I've been doing this podcast now for a few months. Still nothing. So
we'll try to make that happen.
We'll
write the essay.
We'll write the
essay, Dave. Don't skirt the homework.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Private Parts Unknown. Stay tuned right here because I've got another sexy episode coming your way next week, pun intended. For the latest episodes, look down and make sure you're following us on your favorite podcast player now. On most of the apps, it's like a follow or a subscribe button. On Spotify, it's also like a bell button. To stay in touch between episodes, follow me at Courtney Kosak. Last name is KoCak on Instagram and Twitter. And follow the show at Private Parts Unknown on Instagram and at Private Parts Un on Twitter. And hey, privates, I am shamelessly trying to hit the top 1% on OnlyFans always and forever. So if you are interested in a Playboy-style peek behind the podcast, you can subscribe to my OnlyFans account at onlyfans.com/CocoPeepShow. It is a very horny way to help support the show. So if you are interested, please don't hesitate to join me. It is onlyfans.com/CocoPeepShow. Of course, subscribe to our newsletter at privatepartsunknown.substack.com. There is a link for that in the episode description. And subscribe to the Private Parts Unknown YouTube channel for the video version of a bunch of episodes. The audio episodes also automatically update over there now. So head on over to youtube.com/privatepartsunknown and smash that subscribe button. That is youtube.com/privatepartsunknown. And check out my other podcast for more of my audio creations. I have The Bleeders about book writing and publishing. I just released a new episode with John Small, actually. And I also have Podcast Bestie, which is a best friend to podcasters trying to grow and monetize their shows. And if you are a writer and you not only want to generate a ton of new material, but get it published, like the viral essay for Cosmo that I released several weeks ago, I have got the writing intensive of your dreams going down in November. I'm bringing back Pitch Party for November and I'm giving it a twist. I'm adding a newsletter element because I feel like so many writers are multidimensional. They've got their hands in all these different buckets, and I wanted to expand the intensive to cover newsletters as well. So anyway, if you're interested, head on over to my website. It is CourtneyKosak.com/teaching. Again, Courtney Kosak, last name KOCAK.com/teaching. And you can use code PRIVATE for $100 off. Shout out to Amy Rausch for the bomb-ass theme music. For more info about Amy and her music, check out amyrausch.com. That is Amy, RAASCH.com. This episode was mixed by my beloved audio guy, Michael Castaneda of Plastic Audio. And after enjoying this content, could we ask you for a quick favor? Just go to ratethispodcast.com/private and give us a 5-star rating and review. I would love to hit #1 on the sexuality charts before I go out with my book proposal. We have been jumping around in the top 100, but I want to hit #1, and you can help me do that. No matter where you are listening, you can go to ratethispodcast.com/private and rate and review the show. And oh my God, it would just so make my day. And before we go, there is one more way you can help support the show. We are now on the Fountain app. So if you are listening on a V4V platform and you get value from this show, you can support us by sending a boostagram, and you can even send a comment along with your boost. And I have to say, those are my favorite messages to get because they come with a little bit of Bitcoin. And I'm also going to read the next couple that I get on the podcast. So I would love to get your boostagrams. And thank you so much for sticking with me until the end. So until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. I love you, privates.